By the time the northbound mail coach reached Bitter Pine, the rain had turned to sleet, and the men inside Hattie Boone's wayhouse had wagered $6 on how long Gideon Rusk's newest bride would last. 3 days, said Orson Vale, the freight clerk. Till sundown, said a trapper with frost in his beard. Someone near the stove laughed. She'll see the bear and stay on the coach. Gideon heard them through the wall. He stood beneath the porch roof with his hat in both hands, shoulders bent though the beam cleared him. Nearly 7 feet of buckskin, wool, and weather filled the space beside the door. Sleet shone in his black hair and gathered along the seams of his coat. He could have gone inside and stopped the betting. He could have lifted Orson by his expensive collar and set him in the mud without bruising a button. Instead, Gideon counted the coach lamps appearing through the trees. His mother's voice returned as clearly as the creak of harness. Strength is a loan, Gideon. Every day, you decide what it pays for. Abigail Rusk had been dead 25 years. Yet he still heard her whenever anger made his hands feel too large. The coach rounded the bend in a spray of mud. The driver stood on the brake, cursing the grade, and the 6-horse team came stamping into town with steam rolling from their flanks. Gideon straightened despite himself. 5 women had come west under agreements bearing his name. 1 had cried before he spoke. 2 had endured supper and left together on the morning stage. Another had stayed 4 weeks, long enough for Bitter Pine to poison every silence between them. The last had taken Gideon's private shame into Hattie's public room and made men laugh over it until midnight. After that, he had burned the Omaha agency's letters unopened. Hattie had written the 6th reply without asking him. He had not forgiven her. He had still come to meet the coach. The door opened. A salesman climbed down, followed by a miner and a young mother carrying a sleeping child. Then the driver offered his hand to a woman in a dark brown traveling coat. She ignored it. She tested the iron step with one boot, caught the rail, and descended under her own balance. She was small enough that the coach wheel rose nearly to her shoulder. A plain hat pinned over chestnut hair had gone dark with rain. One streak of silver showed near her left temple. She carried a square leather case in one hand and a carpet bag in the other. The driver leaned close. Gideon caught only, "That's him," and "No shame in riding on." The woman followed his glance. Her eyes found Gideon. Faces gathered at the wayhouse windows. Gideon knew the usual sequence. The stare, the quick inventory of his height and shoulders, then the recoil people tried to hide by adjusting a collar or smoothing a sleeve. This woman did look. She looked from his boots to his face slowly enough that neither of them could pretend to weigh the difference. But she did not step back. She shifted her leather case and crossed the muddy yard. "You're Gideon Rusk?" "Yes, ma'am." "Mara Ellison." She did not offer her hand. Gideon was relieved. A handshake with a stranger always became a demonstration, either of his caution or their courage. Her gaze moved to the windows and returned to him. "I was told there is a room for me at your house." "There is." "Does the door lock from the inside?" The men behind the glass went still. "It does," Gideon said. "Who has the key?" "You will." "No other copy?" "No." Mara studied his face, weighing not the answer, but the man who gave it. Then she nodded. "That will do for a beginning." No one in Bitter Pine had ever looked at Gideon and spoken of beginnings. He reached for her carpet bag, then stopped. "May I?" A faint change crossed her face. Not softness. Not yet. Perhaps surprise. "You may take the bag. The case stays with me." He lifted the carpet bag. The case had brass corners. and a small black handle polished by use. Telegraph equipment, perhaps. Hattie's letter had said Mara knew wire work and had once taught school. It had said nothing about why she was willing to cross half a continent for a man 5 others had refused. The weighhouse door banged open. Hattie Boone came down the steps with a shawl over her white hair and no coat. She was 63, broad through the middle, and moved as though weather were a personal insult. "Inside," she ordered. "I did not keep coffee hot so you could conduct a marriage interview in freezing rain." Mara looked at Gideon. "Coffee first," he said. "The road to my place climbs another 4 miles. Then coffee first." Hattie turned toward the window and raised her voice. "Any man with money on this woman's departure can add it to her travel fund or get out." Faces vanished. The public room smelled of wet coats, bacon grease, lamp oil, and pine smoke. Conversation resumed in pieces as Gideon entered. He ducked through the door from habit. The beam cleared his hair by 3 inches. Mara noticed. She also noticed Orson sweeping coins into his pocket and the empty half-circle that formed around Gideon no matter where he stood. Hattie set 2 cups at a corner table. Gideon chose the chair against the wall so Mara would have a clear path to the door. It was a small decision he had made for every woman who had sat across from him. None had seemed to see it. Mara removed her gloves finger by finger. Her hands were narrow, the knuckles reddened by cold. A pale scar crossed the heel of her right palm. "Hattie's letter said you worked the telegraph," Gideon said. "I did. Bitter Pine's line has been dead since spring." "I know. Who told you?" "I asked before I came." Hattie poured coffee and gave Gideon a look warning him not to ruin what she had arranged. He ignored it. "I also know the school closed when Mrs. Bell injured her hip," Mara said. "The nearest working wire is at Carson Fork, 28 miles south. Freight over the pass is controlled by Creed Transit, except when you guide independent wagons through the snow." Silas Creed's name had a way of souring a room. "You asked plenty," Gideon said. "I do not enter arrangements blind." Behind them, someone muttered, "Should have asked about the rest." A chair scraped. Gideon turned. The trapper with frost in his beard had spoken. His eyes held the bright pleasure of a man performing for friends. Gideon had heard his body discussed in freight yards, barns, bunkhouses, and once during a funeral meal. He had learned that silence ended such talk faster than anger. Before he could turn back, Mara spoke. "The rest of what?" The trapper's smile faltered. "You offered information," she said. "Finish it." He glanced at Gideon and found no rescue. Nothing fit for a lady. "Then it was not fit for you to begin." A soft sound moved through the room. The man looked away. Mara turned back to Gideon. "I imagine we have more useful matters to discuss." He had the strange sensation that a door had opened somewhere he could not see. "Yes," he said. She took 1 sip of coffee and folded her hands. "I will be plain, Mr. Rusk. I did not come west because I find an arranged marriage romantic. I came because I required distance from Nebraska, paid work, and a room under my own control." Gideon waited. "I can repair a relay, splice line, keep accounts, and teach reading through algebra. In return, I need shelter through winter and access to the abandoned telegraph office. Once I earn wages, I pay my share of food. You will not pay me for food." Then we begin with a disagreement. It is my house, and it would be my labor helping to keep it. There was no flirtation in her face, no effort to soften her demand. She negotiated as she might have negotiated freight rates. A sensible man might have been offended. Gideon felt steadied. "What do you propose?" "A trial until the thaw. Separate rooms. Separate money. No claim on my work or belongings. You do not enter my room without permission, even if the door is open." "All right. I am not finished." He lowered his eyes. "Go on." "No touching without asking. Not because I believe you mean harm, but because intention is not consent." The room faded around him. Gideon thought of hands pulled away, of fear hidden behind duty, of one woman saying, "If I am to be your wife, I suppose I have no choice." He had stepped away and slept in the barn. She had left before dawn and given the town another version. Mara watched him without blinking. "All right," he said. "If either of us decides this cannot continue, we say so directly. No disappearance, no public accusation before private truth." At that, his gaze rose. She had not chosen those words by accident. "Agreed. If spring comes and we do not wish to marry, neither owes the other apology or payment. You traveled too far to leave with nothing. I would leave with wages, work, and my own name. That is not nothing." Hattie moved away from the table, perhaps sensing the conversation had become too private even for her. Gideon looked at Mara's leather case. A thin line of water ran down one brass corner. She had crossed hundreds of miles with whatever lay inside and had never let the driver carry it. "What do you need distance from?" he asked. Her thumb touched the scar in her palm. "That is not part of today's bargain." He nodded. "What do you need from a wife?" she asked. The question struck harder than he expected. Not a cook. He cooked well enough. Not a housekeeper. Solitude had made him orderly. Not a body in his bed. He had spent too many years fearing what closeness might cost another person. "The truth," he said, "even when it is unkind." Mara considered him. "I can promise honesty. I cannot promise it will always be gentle. I have had gentle lies." For the first time, her expression softened. "So have I." Gideon reached inside his coat. Every man in the room noticed. The trapper's hand stopped halfway to his cup. Gideon drew out a small brass key on a leather thong. He had cut it that morning after fitting a new lock to the east bedroom. He placed it between them. Mara looked at the key but did not touch it. "There is one copy," he said. "I made the lock myself. No master key. Once you close that door, no one enters unless you open it. Not even you. Especially not me." The sleet tapped the window panes. Mara picked up the key and tested its filed teeth with her thumb. Then she tied the leather around her wrist. "Until the thaw," she said. "Until the thaw. And after that?" Gideon looked at the woman Hattie had summoned without his permission, at the case she guarded, the silver in her hair, and the rain shining on her shoulders. For once, hope did not feel like a trap closing. It felt smaller, more cautious, like a wire carrying a signal through bad weather. "After that," he said, "we tell each other the truth." Mara held out her hand. This time Gideon did not reach until she gave the slightest nod. His palm closed around hers with room to spare. Her fingers were cold, but the grip was firm. She did not test his strength, and she did not ask him to hide it. Across the room, Orson Vale quietly placed his $6 on Hattie's counter. Outside, sleet thickened over Bitter Pine Pass. Inside, Mara Ellison wore the only key to a locked room in Gideon Rusk's house, and Gideon understood that for the first time in his life, a woman had not arrived promising to belong to him. She had arrived insisting she belonged to herself. He found he wanted her to stay all the more for it. The road to the pass house climbed out of bitter pine in switchbacks slick with sleet. Gideon drove with both hands low on the reins, keeping the wagon's right wheels close to the uphill bank. To the left, the land fell away into black firs and a creek white with runoff. Mara sat beside him, beneath a buffalo robe, her leather case braced between her boots. At the third bend, one wheel slipped. The wagon tilted toward the drop. "Stay still," Gideon said. He eased the team forward one step, then another. When the wheel found stone again, the wagon settled. "You knew where the ledge was," Mara said. "I repaired this road." "And the town lets one man keep it passable?" "The town pays Creed Transit." "That was not my question." Gideon glanced at her. "No, they let me." Mara rested one hand on the leather case. "I have known arrangements like that." He wanted to ask what kind, but her answer at the weighhouse remained between them, not part of today's bargain. Below the road, a dark telegraph wire sagged between broken poles. "Where does it terminate?" she asked. "Old office beside the schoolhouse, south to Carson Fork when it runs." "When did it fail?" "April." Creed said repairs would cost more than bitter pine was worth. At Creed's name, her face closed. The pass house appeared near dusk, beneath a granite shoulder. Gideon had raised it from larch logs 12 years earlier, making every beam high and every doorway broad enough for him. A barn stood behind it, half sheltered by the mountain. Mara studied the house. "It is larger than I expected. Most things I build are—" The words escaped before he could stop them. Heat climbed his neck. "I meant the rafters," he said. "I assumed you did." There was no mockery in her voice, but memory supplied it anyway. Inside, a stove glowed beside the stone chimney. Snowshoes, traps, ropes, and saws hung in careful order. The furniture was plain and built to Gideon's scale. Mara's head barely reached the back of one chair. "The east room is yours," he said. He had aired it, laid clean blankets on an ordinary-sized bed, and placed a small desk beneath the window. Mara set down her leather case. Then she closed the door between them. Gideon waited in the hall. The key entered the lock. Brass turned. The bolt slid home. A moment later, the door opened. "It works," Mara said. "Yes." You waited. You closed the door. Her gaze moved to the new strike plate and the raw wood around it. "You made this today. This morning. You did not know whether I would come." "No. You made it anyway. A promise should be ready before it is needed." Something shifted in her expression. "You may set the bag inside." He placed it beside the bed and stepped out without looking toward the case. They ate elk stew at opposite ends of the work table. Gideon had lit 2 lamps, though one would have been enough. The second pool of light changed the room. "Where do you sleep?" Mara asked. "Back room." "Does it have a door?" "It does." "Good. Boundaries ought to work both ways." After supper, she washed the bowls. He dried them. Their first disagreement concerned where the flour belonged and ended without either winning. At 9, Mara paused at her threshold. "Thank you for not asking what is inside the case. You said it was not part of today's bargain." "No, it was not." The door closed. The key turned. That night, Mara lay awake with the brass key beneath her palm. The house spoke around her. Wind pressed the logs. A branch scratched the roof. Once, heavy steps crossed the far end of the hall, stopped well short of her door, and retreated. She waited for the handle to move. It did not. Eventually, she pulled the leather case from beneath the bed. Inside lay a telegraph key wrapped in wool. 2 relay magnets, a roll of insulated wire, a narrow red ledger, and 3 folded documents bearing county seals. Mara touched the ledger but did not open it. For 6 years, she had earned her bread listening to men speak across copper wire. Merchants lied more freely at a distance. Lawyers grew careless when they believed only clerks could hear. Silas Creed had built half his fortune on that mistake. Her late husband, Thomas Ellison, had discovered the first false freight claim. Mara had discovered the rest. Then, Thomas had died beneath a wagon whose brake pin had been filed nearly through. The coroner called it an accident. Silas called it a tragedy. Mara called it a warning. She closed the case and locked it. Across the hall, Gideon lay awake, wondering why he had admitted the truth about the road, that Bitter Pine paid a rich man for work Gideon performed cheaply. Mara had looked at the arrangement as though it offended her personally. No woman had ever been angry for him before. That frightened him more than her leaving. Morning came clean and hard. Gideon found Mara at the work table, making columns on a sheet of paper. "What is that?" "An inventory for the telegraph office. You have not seen it." "I saw the sagging roof. I assume mice have shown initiative." He poured coffee. "The office has been shut 7 months. Then the mice are probably management." A laugh moved in his chest before he could stop it. Mara looked up, startled not by the sound, but perhaps by the fact that he had made it. "I go down after feeding the stock," he said. "I can help. No need. That is not the same as being unwelcome." In the barn, Gideon showed her the sorrel mare Hattie had loaned for winter. When Mara reached too quickly, the mare pinned her ears. "What does that mean?" Mara asked. "She is deciding whether you are foolish. And? Let her smell you first." Mara offered the back of her hand. The mare's nostrils moved. Gideon stopped 2 arm lengths behind her. "May I show you?" "Yes." His hand closed lightly around her wrist, guiding her palm to the mare's cheek. The sorrel relaxed. "So much of surviving animals," Mara said, "seems to involve asking permission. Most folks call it patience. Most folks need a better word." He released her at once. The absence of his hand registered more sharply than its weight had. They rode into Bitter Pine after breakfast. The telegraph office leaned against the one-room schoolhouse like a tired man seeking support. Ada Bell waited inside, upright over a cane. 6 children sat at desks wearing coats and mittens. Jamie Pike occupied the front row and stared at Gideon. "Mrs. Ellison?" Ada asked. "Mara will do." "Ada, then." She pointed her cane toward the adjoining office. "That room belongs to the territorial line. Creed's lease. The Almighty, or the mice, depending on who is asked. I have no patience left for any of them." "Then I will negotiate with the mice first." Jamie raised his hand. "Is he staying?" Every child looked at Gideon. "He is helping me inspect the line," Mara said. "Can you really lift a wagon?" Jamie asked. "Not a loaded one. My pa says you lifted Orson Vale's freight rig. Your pa held the other side." Jamie looked disappointed by the correction. The telegraph office smelled of coal dust and old battery acid. Mara opened the shutters. Light struck a broken chair, a counter, and a sounder beneath a glass hood. The brass was green with corrosion. One binding post had snapped. "Can it be repaired?" Gideon asked. "Yes." "You answered fast." "The line may not be worth saving. The instrument is." She unwrapped her own key and relay from the leather case, keeping the lid between Gideon and everything below. I need the broken post extracted without damaging the threads. The screw is seized. I know. I may break the plate. I know that too. He looked at her. She folded her arms. Are you warning me, or asking whether I trust your hands? The question went through him. Asking. I trust you with the post. Not with everything, not yet. But with this. Gideon selected the smallest punch from his tool roll, warmed the brass near the stove, touched oil to the threads, and turned the ruined post a fraction at a time. His fingers dwarfed the machine. Each movement was exact. After 10 minutes, the post came free. Jamie, peering through the door, whispered, I thought he'd crush it. Gideon's hand stopped. Mara called the boy closer and placed the broken post in his palm. What removed it? She asked. Jamie looked at Gideon. A little tool. A precise hand, Mara said. Strength does not decide what a hand destroys. The person does. Jamie nodded. Gideon set the punch down because his fingers had begun to shake. They worked until noon. Mara cleaned contacts and tested coils. Gideon repaired the chair and shutter, then climbed the nearest standing pole. Mara watched him ascend with a leather belt around the cedar. Indoors, he carried his size like an apology. At height, it became balance and reach. Wire is sound northward, he called. 3 poles down at the creek, maybe 4. How much can you salvage? Enough if the river kept the far span. Then we need insulators, crossarms, poles, and batteries. Battery jars are in Creed's office at Carson Fork. Then we will not ask Creed. You cannot run a line without them. I can build gravity cells if Hattie has copper, zinc, and blue vitriol. Hattie has coffee and opinions. Civilization has advanced on less. At the Way House, Hattie produced 2 cracked jars, copper strip, and zinc from a damaged wash tub. By late afternoon, the office windows were uncovered, the stove drew properly, and 2 improvised cells sat beneath the counter. Mara connected her key to a local circuit. The sounder clicked when she tapped. Jamie and 3 other children crowded near. What did you say? He asked. My name. Can it say mine? It can say anything you have patience enough to learn. Ada watched from the doorway. School resumes Monday. Apparently, I found my replacement. Assistant, Mara said. Do not ruin this for me. Then Orson Vale appeared in the doorway. He looked at the repaired office, the children, and the temporary batteries. Creed owns the lease. Mara did not turn from the key. Does he own the schoolhouse? No. The stove? No. The dust? Orson's mouth tightened. He owns the right to transmit. The line does not transmit. You mean to repair it? You will need Creed's permission. Show me the lease. What? The document granting Silas Creed exclusive control. Show me its term, repair obligations, and abandonment clause. Orson's confidence slipped. I do not carry legal papers in my coat. Then bring them tomorrow. You do not understand how business is done here. I understand how business is done when no one asks to read the paper. Silence spread through the schoolroom. Orson looked toward Gideon, seeking intimidation or agreement. Gideon gave him neither. Orson left with the stiff-backed dignity of a man who intended to return carrying someone else's power. Mara knelt beside her case and opened it only far enough to slip the telegraph key inside. For one instant, Gideon saw beneath the wool wrapping a red leather ledger. Mara looked up and knew he had seen it. Neither spoke. Outside, the fallen wire lay black across the snow, pointing south toward Carson Fork and the empire Silas Creed had built from paper, silence, and men who never asked to see either one clearly. "Tomorrow," Mara said, "I would like to inspect the creek span. Weather may turn. Then teach me how to read it." Gideon looked at the restored instrument and the woman who had challenged the richest man in the district before spending a full day in town. "You may not like what the mountain tells you." Mara tied the brass room key more securely around her wrist. "I did not come here to be told only pleasant things." By sunset, the pass house held 2 separate lamps again. On Mara's desk, the telegraph key waited beside the locked case. On Gideon's workbench, the broken brass post lay beneath one fingertip, proof that the difference between ruin and repair had never been the size of the hand. It had always been the care behind it. The creek span took them half a day to reach. Snow had crusted over the trail during the night, hard enough to carry Mara for 6 steps and betray her on the 7th. Gideon moved ahead in rawhide snowshoes, breaking a path broad enough for her smaller pair. "Do not follow my footprints exactly," he said. "That seems contrary to the purpose of making them. My stride is longer. Step where the snow is packed, not where my heel ends." At the ridge above Alder Creek, Gideon stopped and pointed toward a cornice hanging over the eastern slope. To Mara it looked like ordinary snow. "See that dark seam beneath the lip?" "Yes. Wind hollowed it underneath. If the day warms, it may break. How far will it carry?" "Far enough to bury the lower bridge." The bridge lay beyond a stand of fir, a narrow suspension crossing built for foot traffic and pack animals. One cable had dropped. 2 poles on the south bank leaned into the creek, and black telegraph wire vanished beneath ice. "Can we work safely?" Mara asked. "For a few hours." He showed her where to stand while he tested the remaining cable. The hemp core was sound, but rust had eaten through the outer wire beneath a clamp. Mara crouched beside the fallen line. "If we raise this section and splice beyond the break, the circuit may reach the office. We need a pole. That cedar? Too green. The dead fir? Too close to the slope. You have rejected both available answers. There is a third." Gideon crossed the damaged bridge, climbed a stone outcrop, and looped rope around a lightning-scarred pine growing above the line. "You intend to make the tree the pole?" Mara called. "For winter. In spring, we set cedar." He moved with an assurance she had not seen in town. Rope, axe, cable, distance. Each seemed to speak a language he understood without translation. By noon, they had hauled the line clear of the creek and lashed it high against the pine. Mara stripped the wet insulation, twisted the copper, soldered it over a spirit flame, and sealed the joint with pitch and cloth. Gideon held the wire between 2 fingers. "Too tight?" "Not yet." He did not move until she said, "Now." On the return trail, the sky lost its color. Gideon stopped twice to study the fir tops. "What do they say?" Mara asked. "Snow before dark, wind after." "Can we reach town?" "The house is safer. I need to test the circuit." "You will test it tomorrow." She disliked being overruled. She disliked dying more. "Home, then." The word slipped out naturally. Gideon heard it. His face did not change, but his next step was lighter. The first signal reached the pass house before supper. They had connected a practice sounder to Mara's portable cell. When she closed the key, the magnet snapped, hesitated, then broke into clean, bright chatter. Mara laughed. It was not the guarded breath of amusement she allowed herself at Hattie's table. This came free and young, startling them both. Gideon stood near the stove holding a coil of cable. He looked at her as though the sound had crossed a greater distance than Omaha to Bitter Pine. "We have line to the house," she said. "Tomorrow we carry it to the office." "Can it reach Carson Fork?" "If Creed has not cut his end." She unwound the brass key from her wrist and used it to tighten a binding screw. "You use that key for everything but the door," Gideon said. "It is well made." "That was not what I meant." Mara looked down at it. "No, I suppose it was not." The next morning, Orson arrived at the telegraph office carrying a folded lease and the confidence of a man who believed paper ended arguments. Mara read it twice. Ada stood behind her, Jamie behind Ada, and Hattie behind Jamie with a skillet tucked beneath one arm for reasons no one asked her to explain. "The lease expired in August," Mara said. "It renews automatically. Only if Creed maintains service. Clause 11 returns local access after 90 days without it. He intends to repair the line. He abandoned it 7 months ago." Orson reached for the document. Mara held one finger on it. "The county clerk's name is misspelled." Hattie made a pleased sound. Orson's face hardened. "You are accusing Mr. Creed of forgery?" "I am asking why a man who owns a railroad spur cannot spell the name of the official who supposedly signed his lease." "You had best be careful." Gideon straightened from the schoolhouse steps he was repairing. Mara did not look toward him. "Careful is why I read before signing." Orson left with the lease crushed in his fist. By sunset, Bitter Pine's line was alive. The first message came from Carson Fork in impatient clicks. "Who operates BP?" Mara sat at the key. "Mara Ellison. Stop local service restored. Stop identify." A pause. "Carson Fork office stop Creed transit objects. To unauthorized use." Mara tapped back. "Lease expired August stop service. Abandoned stop Bitter Pine resumes. Local access. Under Clause 11. Stop send objection. In writing." No reply came. Hattie leaned over the counter. "Can that machine tell when a rich man is choking?" "No," Mara said, "but silence travels clearly." Mara began teaching code the following Monday. Ada handled letters and sums in the main room, while Jamie and the older children took turns at the key. A wire ran to a bell in Hattie's kitchen. Each correctly transmitted word earned a biscuit. Jamie became fluent in 3 days. Gideon came down twice that week with bundles of beaver and marten pelts for Orson's freight scale. Mara watched the clerk enter figures in his book. After the second trip, she asked Gideon for his receipts. "I do not keep them." "You have needed to." He produced 4 folded slips from his coat. Mara compared weight, grade, and freight deduction, then asked Hattie what independent trappers received at Carson Fork. The difference was nearly a third. "How long have you sold through Creed?" Mara asked. 11 years. "And how often does Orson weigh your load where you can see the scale?" Gideon understood. His jaw hardened. "He says my bulk crowds the platform. He has also deducted bridge tolls from shipments you carried over a bridge you repaired." "How much?" "I cannot know without older records. On these?" she told him. He could have crossed the street and pulled the truth out of Orson by force. Everyone in Bitter Pine would have expected it. Instead, Gideon placed both hands on the counter and breathed until the wood stopped creaking. "What can be proved?" "These receipts, Hattie's price records, the public schedule at Carson Fork. Then we prove that." That evening, Mara found him splitting wood behind the house with strokes too hard for the grain. "You are allowed to be angry," she said. He set another round upright. Anger has weight. So does silence. Mine weighs more. The axe fell. The log divided cleanly. You believe that because people measure everything you do against your size, Mara said. I could hurt Orson. Yes. I think about it. Yes. His head turned sharply. You expected me to deny it. You are angry, not holy. The question is what you choose. Wind moved through the pines. My mother said strength was a loan. What does anger pay for? He looked at his hands. Proof. A fair scale. Maybe a lock on the freight book. Good. Mara. She stopped. Thank you for not telling me I am better than the thought. You are responsible for your choices, Gideon. I will not insult you by pretending you have no bad ones available. The next day, he built a public weighing frame beside the schoolhouse. Jamie painted the numbers. Ruth Pike arrived with lunch and watched Gideon lift the iron crossbar into place. She kept her daughter behind her skirt. Gideon noticed and stepped away once the beam was secure. Mr. Rusk, Ruth said, Jamie says you let him use your brace drill. I held the wood. He says you did not laugh when he split the first piece. Wood splits. So do boys, if men laugh at the wrong time. Her hand loosened on her daughter's shoulder. Thank you. Gideon removed his hat. He learns fast. When Ruth crossed the road, she no longer pulled the child to the far side. At the pass house, the days found a shape. Mara rose to coffee warming on the stove before Gideon went to the traps. Gideon returned to find his freight columns copied in a hand he could read. She taught him double-entry bookkeeping. He taught her how to tie a bowline one-handed in freezing weather. Why one-handed? Because the other may be holding you alive. She failed 6 times. On the 7th, the loop held. That may save you, he said. Then I will practice until it saves someone else. At night, she repaired line equipment while he carved insulator pins from seasoned oak. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they did not. Mara learned Gideon hummed when reading weather. Gideon learned she checked the front latch 3 times before bed. He began checking it first, then leaving his hand plainly visible when he stepped away. One night, a pan slipped from its hook and struck the stove. Mara rose so fast her chair overturned, her face emptied, one hand lifting as though to protect her head. Gideon froze across the room. It was the pan, he said quietly. I know. He did not approach. After a moment, she righted the chair. My husband never struck me. Thomas? No. My first husband, Daniel Crowell. He broke things near me. Kicked doors. Once he fired a pistol into the ceiling because I would not give him a key to the wire office. Her voice had become painfully precise. Mara rubbed the scar across her palm. I left him. It took me 3 years. Did he do that? He tried to take a key. I closed my hand around it. Gideon looked toward the brass key at her wrist. He cut me open getting it. What became of him? Drink and winter finished what I could not. He wanted to cross the room and take the scarred hand. Wanting did not grant permission. What do you need? He asked. Mara looked at him for a long time. Stay where I can see you. So he did. The storm announced itself 2 days later, with pressure behind Gideon's eyes. At dawn, the horses faced downhill and would not feed. Jays vanished from the pines. A gray shelf of cloud pressed over the western peaks. Gideon entered the telegraph office while Mara was sending freight prices. Close the school. She looked through the window. It is not snowing. It will. How long? Could be 3 days, could be 10. Ada had learned not to question his weather sense. The children were sent home before noon. Gideon inspected the bridge cable, reinforced the schoolhouse shutters, and helped Hattie move flour to higher shelves. Orson watched from the freight office. "Creed's coach is due tomorrow," he said. "Turn it back at Carson Fork. It carries mail. It carries people. Creed will not thank me for losing a run." Gideon tied the last sack. "Then choose whose anger you fear." By dusk, snow erased the road. Mara and Gideon climbed toward the pass house with the wind behind them. Halfway up, she lost the packed trail and sank to her thigh. Panic flashed across her face. "Do not fight it," Gideon said. "I am not. You are." He lay flat to spread his weight and extended his staff. "Take hold." She did. "May I pull?" "Yes." He drew her out slowly. Mara stayed on her knees, breathing hard. "The mountain does not care how competent I am. No, I dislike it." "So do I." Then a sound rolled across the valley, not thunder, but a deep, tearing crack. Gideon turned toward the eastern ridge. The cornice broke loose. For several seconds, the whole mountainside moved. Snow poured through the firs in a widening cloud, carrying branches, stone, and treetops. Gideon threw himself over Mara, forcing them against the uphill bank as powder blasted across the road. Then the valley went still. Mara coughed snow from her mouth. "The bridge?" Gideon lifted his head. Below them, the avalanche had crossed Alder Creek. The telegraph wire hung slack. The lower span is gone. A second crack sounded farther upslope. He pulled Mara to her feet. "Pass house. Now." They reached it after dark. Gideon barred the shutters while Mara tested the temporary sounder. She pressed the key. No answer came from Bitter Pine. She tried again. Only dead metal. "The line is cut," she said. "And the road is buried. How long before we can reach them?" "When the slope settles." "How long?" He met her eyes. "We are alone until it does." The wind struck the pass house like a giant hand. The lamps trembled, but the door held. On Mara's wrist, the brass key knocked softly against the table as they listened to the silence where the telegraph had been. For the first time since she arrived, the locked room was not the only boundary that mattered. The mountain had closed every door around them. The storm held them above Bitter Pine for 2 days. Snow hammered the shutters until noon on the second day, then stopped so suddenly that the silence felt like another kind of weather. Gideon opened the north door a hand's width. A wall of white stood against it. "We dig from the loft," he said. They climbed through the hay hatch and worked down from the roof with shovels. By mid-afternoon, a narrow trench connected the barn to the upper trail. The sky had cleared to a hard blue, but the mountains gave off small, settling groans. Mara tested the sounder again. Nothing. Gideon watched the eastern slope. "We can descend at first light. What if someone needed the line yesterday? Then we help who is still waiting." It was not comfort. Mara trusted it more because he did not pretend it was. At dawn, they left the horses behind and went down on snowshoes, carrying rope, blankets, a medical roll, and Gideon's bridge tools. The trail had vanished. Trees lay snapped in the avalanche path, their roots pointing at the sky. Near Alder Creek, they found the first sign of trouble, a child's red mitten frozen into the surface of the snow. Mara picked it up. "Jamie wears red," she said. Gideon crouched beside a shallow groove leading toward the school ridge. 3 small tracks, 1 adult. They crossed before the slide. Why would Ada have taken them out? She would not. A faint metal ringing came from below. Not a bell, a bridge cable striking stone. They followed the sound to the gorge. The avalanche had swept away half the footbridge. The north tower still stood, but the south decking hung vertically above the creek. Meltwater rushed black beneath rafts of broken ice. On the far bank, Jamie Pike stood with two younger children beneath an overhang of rock. Ada Bell sat against the cliff with one leg stretched before her. Jamie saw them and began shouting. "We heard the school roof cracking," he called across the water. "Mrs. Bell took us to the old survey cabin, but the slide hit the trail. She hurt her ankle." Mara put both hands around her mouth. "Is anyone bleeding?" Lucy cut her face. "Ben's cold." Gideon examined the remaining cable. The main line ran from the north anchorage across the gorge, but the far saddle had torn loose. It sagged low enough to touch the flood. "We need a traveler," he said. Mara knew the device, a pulley block on the cable, with a rope looped through it so people could be hauled one at a time. "The far end will not hold weight." "I will." She turned to him. Gideon was already unwinding the longest rope. He tied one end around a spruce trunk, then made a second harness around his waist and chest. The line crossed his body twice. "You cannot become a bridge." "No, only an anchor. The current will take the cable. Not if I lift it." "With what?" He looked at her as if the answer were obvious. Mara stared at the gorge, the children, then at Gideon's harness. "If the north anchor shifts, it will pull you in. You will watch it. That is not enough. You know the bowline." Her hands went cold. The one-handed knot he had made her practice was no longer a lesson. Gideon crouched so they were nearer eye level. "Mara, I need you on the brake line. If I lose my footing, wrap twice around the spruce and lock the knot. Do not try to hold me yourself." She hated the calm in his voice. "Do you understand?" "Yes." "Say it. 2 wraps. Lock the bowline. Do not take your weight in my hands." "Good." He moved to the edge, planted both boots against a shelf of stone, and took the damaged cable in his hands. When he stood, the wire rose from the flood. Every muscle in his back tightened beneath his coat. The cable hummed. Mara fitted the traveler pulley over it. She tied a sling beneath the block and sent the hauling rope across with a weighted throw line. Jamie caught it on the 3rd attempt. "Ben first," Mara called. The smallest child was crying too hard to move. Ada pulled him into the sling and tied him in, while Jamie copied Mara's shouted instructions. "Ready," Jamie called. Mara hauled. The block rolled out above the gorge. Halfway across, a chunk of ice struck the cable. Gideon grunted and slid 6 inches toward the edge. Mara wrapped the brake line around the spruce. "Hold," he said. She held. Ben reached the near bank. Mara dragged him clear, wrapped him in a blanket, and checked his hands and breathing. "Again," Gideon said. Lucy came next, with blood frozen along one cheek, then Jamie. The boy refused the sling until Ada was secured. "I can climb," he shouted. "You can obey," Gideon answered, his voice carrying through the gorge. "Mrs. Bell goes now." Ada's injured leg made the crossing slow. Each movement sent the traveler swinging. Gideon's boots slipped again. This time, one knee struck stone. The cable dropped into the water. Ada screamed as spray covered her. Mara locked the bowline one-handed around the spruce. The knot caught. Gideon was pulled sideways, but the backup rope stopped him before the ledge. For one terrible second, he hung above the flood by the harness, one hand still gripping the cable. Mara wanted to run to him. She stayed at the break. "Gideon, haul her. You are slipping. Haul her, Mara." She hauled. Ada reached the bank. Mara and Jamie pulled her onto the snow. Only then did Gideon drag himself back onto the shelf. He lifted the cable again, but his movements had slowed. Jamie entered the sling. "I am not scared," he said. "Then use your hands anyway," Mara told him. "Hold the strap." The boy traveled over the water, watching Gideon instead of the creek. When Mara pulled him ashore, the far bank was empty. "Let it go," she called. Gideon did not. The cable had twisted around his right glove. If he released it carelessly, the recoil could cut through him or strike the children. "Take them uphill," he said. Mara saw what had happened. "No, now." She sent Jamie with Ben and Lucy toward the trees, then helped Ada crawl beyond the line of recoil. Gideon shifted his grip. The cable snapped free. It whipped across the gorge with a sound like a rifle shot. Gideon turned, but the steel caught his shoulder and threw him into the creek. Mara was already on the brake rope. The harness line ran hard around the spruce. Water dragged Gideon downstream until he struck the bank below the bridge. "Gideon!" He did not answer. Mara tied the bowline, tested it once, and slid down the slope. The creek reached her waist before she found his coat. The current drove ice against her legs. Gideon's head rolled against the stones. She could not lift him, so she stopped trying. Mara cut the outer rope from his shoulder, rolled him onto the loop of his harness, and used the anchored line as a pulley. Inch by inch, she dragged him out of the current. Jamie appeared above her. "I told you to stay uphill. You need help. I need you to wrap that rope twice around the spruce. I know the knot." He did. Gideon had taught him. Together they raised Gideon onto the bank. His lips were blue. His breathing came shallow and uneven. Mara stripped off his wet coat and shirt, while Jamie stared toward the trees. Is he dead? No. The answer came before certainty. She opened her medical roll. "Bring the blankets. Then gather dry branches from beneath the firs, not from the ground." She rubbed Gideon's chest and sides with wool until her arms burned. He did not wake. There was too much of him to warm. Mara crawled beneath the blankets and pressed herself against his bare chest, using her body where the fire could not reach. The difference in their size ceased to be spectacle. It became a measure of how much cold she had to fight. "Gideon Rusk," she said against his skin. "You do not get to hold up a bridge and then leave me with the paperwork." "Nothing." She struck his sternum with the heel of her hand. His body convulsed. Water came from his mouth. He coughed once, then again, each breath tearing through him. Mara closed her eyes. "Stay angry," he murmured. "I intend to." The fire caught. Jamie fed it while Mara kept Gideon wrapped between blankets and her own warmth. Ruth Pike and 3 townsmen reached them near dusk, following the children's tracks. Ruth crossed the snow on her knees when she saw Jamie. She held him, then looked past him to Gideon, lying pale beside the fire. "That man saved us," Jamie said. "He held the whole bridge." Ruth touched Gideon's discarded glove. The palm had been cut through to the skin. "No," Mara said. "He held one cable. The rest of us held him." Ruth looked at Mara, then at Jamie tightening the rope around the blanket litter. "Then tell us what to do." They carried Gideon to the North Star after dark. No one called him the Bear. Orson opened the freight office and brought every dry quilt he owned. Hattie heated stones. Ada, gray with pain, directed the children from a cot, while Mara treated Gideon's shoulder and stitched the cable wound across his palm. He woke near midnight. Mara sat beside the bed with the brass key still tied around her wrist. "You came in," he said. "Hattie invited me." Not what I meant. She knew. He remembered her body against his in the snow, the warmth of her skin through terror and cold. Shame entered his face before gratitude could. "It was necessary," he said. "It was my choice." His gaze moved away. Mara took his bandaged hand, then paused. "May I?" After a moment, he turned his palm upward. She placed her hand in it. Outside the room, the wayhouse remained awake. Someone added wood to the stove. Jamie repeated the rescue to anyone who would listen, each telling making the cable higher and the water deeper. Inside, Gideon looked at Mara's small hand, resting within his wounded one. "The bridge is gone," he said. "We will build another. The wire, too. We will string it again. You nearly froze. So did you." He looked toward the window. "I should not have taken you down there. You did not take me. I went." His fingers moved carefully around hers. For the first time, Mara did not feel the urge to check the door. By morning, Bitter Pine had divided around a new truth. Some men still lowered their voices when Gideon's name came up. Old habits did not die because children were safe. But Ruth Pike carried her sleeping son into the public room, faced every table, and said, "The next man who calls Gideon Rusk a beast can explain to Jamie why the beast was the one who crossed a broken mountain to bring him home." No one answered. At the back of the room, Orson quietly removed Creed Transit's rate sheet from the wall. Gideon did not hear Ruth's words. He slept through them, his wounded hand open on the quilt. Mara sat beside him until sunlight reached the brass key at her wrist and made it shine. The key still belonged to a locked room, but now, for the first time, it also belonged to a door she was beginning to want opened. 3 days after Gideon woke, the first ugly version of the rescue reached the North Star. He had come down for clean bandages and a look at the damaged freight road. His shoulder was strapped, his right hand stitched and wrapped, but the town had begun treating his injuries as public property. Men asked to see the cable cut. Children wanted to know whether the creek had carried him under. Gideon answered what he could and kept his coat buttoned. Mara was in the telegraph office sorting salvaged wire when laughter broke from the public room. A freighter she did not know had arrived from Carson Fork with a sled of lamp oil. He stood near the stove, performing the story for men who had not been at the gorge. "So Mrs. Ellison stripped the bear naked and climbed right on top of him," he said. "Only way to warm that much man, I suppose." A few men laughed because laughter was easier than deciding what courage required. Mara entered before Hattie could lift the stove poker. The freighter saw her and discovered his cup. "You have mistaken necessity for invitation," Mara said. His face reddened. "No offense intended." "Then you have the rare gift of causing what you do not intend." Hattie planted the poker against the floor. "You can take your oil and your mouth outside." The freighter muttered that folks had always known Gideon inspired unusual measures in women. "Known what?" Mara asked. Silence tightened around the stove. Orson Vale stared at the floor. Ruth Pike, seated with Jamie beside her, drew her daughter closer, not from Gideon this time, but from the conversation. Mara looked from one face to another. "You have all allowed me to hear pieces. Today I would like the whole cowardly thing." No one answered until the freighter shrugged. 5 women came for him. None stayed. Last one said a husband built like Rusk would tear a wife apart. Gideon stood in the doorway. The room changed at once. He had heard enough. Mara saw the old retreat enter his body. His shoulders bowed, his injured hand vanished into his coat. The man who had held a bridge cable against floodwater made himself smaller before a sentence. He turned and walked out. Mara followed. He did not wait for her. By the time she reached the road, he was already climbing toward the pass house, his stride long despite the shoulder wound. Gideon. He stopped, but did not turn. Do you want me to leave you alone? Yes. Is that the truth, or the answer you think a decent man should give? His back went rigid. Snowmelt dripped from the pines. The truth, he said at last, is I do not know how to stand there while you look at me knowing what they know. They know gossip. They know enough. He continued uphill. Mara let him go, not because the matter was finished, but because consent did not become less important when she disliked the answer. At the pass house after dark, Gideon sat alone at the work table. He had not lit Mara's lamp. He had left food warm on the stove and placed her dry slippers where snow would not reach them. Even in retreat, he remembered her comfort. Mara removed her coat. The brass key swung at her wrist. I will ask once, she said. Do you want silence tonight? Gideon looked toward the hall. No. Then look at me. He tried. His gaze reached her chin and fell. Mara sat across from him. I heard a vulgar man repeat a frightened woman's prediction. I did not hear the truth from you. The truth is not kinder. Kindness was never our bargain. His bandaged fingers curled. The last woman was named Cora Dane. She stayed 32 days. She said all the proper things. That size did not matter, that people were cruel, that she could see the man beneath it. His mouth twisted. I believed her because I wanted to. What happened? One night she came to my room. She had been drinking at Hattie's. She said she was tired of waiting and tired of the town thinking she was afraid. Mara remained still. I told her we did not have to prove anything to them. She said a wife owed her husband a marriage bed. Then she asked me to undress. The stove gave a low iron tick. I did. She looked at me and went white. I reached for my clothes. She laughed. The word cost him more than anger would have. She said no woman could survive me, said perhaps the reason I acted gentle was because I knew what I was capable of. She left before morning. By supper, half the town knew what she had seen. Mara's hands stayed folded, though rage moved beneath them. Did you touch her? No. Did you prevent her leaving? No. Did you threaten her? No. Then her cruelty was hers. She was frightened. Fear explains an action. It does not make every action honorable. Gideon looked at her then. You warmed me because I was dying, he said. That was not desire. No. The answer struck him, but Mara would not purchase his comfort with a lie. It was not desire, she continued, and it was not disgust. It was care, under terrible conditions. Those are different things. His face closed. And now? He asked. Mara felt the question in the room between them. Now I desire things I did not desire when I arrived. He barely breathed. I desire your company at breakfast. I desire your voice in the next room. I desire the sight of you at work, because you become fully yourself when there is a problem worth solving. A flush rose beneath his beard. I have wondered what it would be like to put my hand against your chest when neither of us is freezing. I have wondered whether you would kiss me as carefully as you repair a telegraph relay. Mara, I have also been afraid. The hope in his face stopped. Not of your body, of losing the right to change my mind once I begin. Men have treated a first yes as ownership of every answer after it. I would not. I believe you. Belief is not the same as certainty, and certainty is not the price I must pay before wanting you. He stared at her. Mara untied the brass key from her wrist and set it on the table. Desire does not erase fear. Fear does not erase desire. Consent is how two people cross the distance without either being dragged. Gideon's eyes shone, but he did not look away. What if I hurt you? Then I will tell you. We will stop. We will learn. We will not turn ignorance into destiny. You speak as though this can be managed. I have managed live electrical current through wet wire. I have managed men who believed a woman at a key was furniture. I expect intimacy requires more listening than either. A rough sound escaped him, almost a laugh. Then the shame returned. You have not seen me. No? When you do, you are deciding my answer before I give it. His eyes closed. Yes? Do not abandon me on my behalf, Gideon. For a while, the wind was the only voice in the house. At last, he said, I do not know how to hope without preparing for the cost. Then prepare, but remain present while you do it. Mara took the key and walked down the hall. Gideon heard it enter her lock. Brass turned. The door opened. Warm lamplight lay across the floorboards. Mara stood inside the room. She had removed her shoes, but nothing else. The bed remained neatly made. Come here, she said. He stopped several feet from the threshold. Inside? No. Sit at the door. Gideon lowered himself carefully. Even seated, his shoulder nearly reached the latch. Mara placed a pillow on her side of the threshold and sat facing him, her knees close to his boots. The open doorway framed them both. What happens now? He asked. Nothing. You have to survive. She lifted her hand. May I touch your face? Yes. Her palm settled against his cheek. Gideon closed his eyes. The touch contained no test. She was not measuring him against rumor or proving courage to a room full of witnesses. Her thumb moved once along the edge of his beard because she wanted to know the feel of him. May I kiss you? She asked. His eyes opened. Yes. Mara leaned across the threshold and kissed him. It was brief, warm, deliberate. Gideon did not follow when she drew back. Her hand remained against his cheek. Again? He whispered. Yes. The second kiss lasted longer. He lifted his uninjured hand, then stopped before touching her. Your waist? He asked. Yes. His palm came to rest against her side with almost no pressure. Mara covered it with her own, not to restrain him, but to show him he had placed it where she chose. When they parted, Gideon's breathing had deepened. Mara did not invite him farther. Instead, she leaned her shoulder against the doorframe. You may sit here until the lamp burns down. And after, you go to your room. Tomorrow we decide tomorrow. He looked at the open door, then at the brass key lying on the floor between them. For years, Gideon had believed love would be proven when a woman crossed every distance at once and did not flee. Now, Mara offered him something slower and far more difficult to mistrust. One clear yes, bounded by the freedom of the next answer. He settled against the opposite side of the frame. They sat with their feet almost touching while the lamp lowered, speaking little. The room remained hers. The hallway remained his. The threshold belonged to neither and both. When the flame finally guttered, Gideon rose. Good night, Mara. Good night, Gideon. She closed the door gently. The key turned. He stood on the other side and smiled. For the first time, the sound of that lock did not mean he had been shut out. It meant she trusted him enough to close a door and believe he would still be there when she opened it again. Spring entered Bitter Pine through the sound of running water beneath the snow. For 12 quiet days, Mara and Gideon learned what came after a first kiss. Sometimes she opened her door. Sometimes she did not. He never asked why. She began leaving her hand on his shoulder when she passed behind him. He began standing straight inside town. Then the repaired wire clicked before dawn. Mara Ellison stop Creed left Carson Fork with deputy and 6 men stop warrants. Questionable, stop hide originals. Mara copied the message, burned the strip, and packed the red ledger, sealed affidavits, and her telegraph key into the carpet bag. Gideon saw it on her bed. The room was open. The bag was closed. He stopped at the threshold. "You are leaving." "No, I am moving evidence." The first answer should have been enough. Old wounds spoke faster. "You said no disappearance, and I am standing here telling you." Before he could apologize, the sounder in the front room gave one broken strike and died. Gideon went to the window. A rider below the ridge was cutting the line. By noon, Silas Creed entered Bitter Pine, behind a deputy wearing a territorial badge and 6 hired men. Creed was narrow, silver-haired, and dressed too well for mud. He posted papers claiming the telegraph office, freight road, and pass house for unpaid company debts. Mara read the first page and laughed once. "You forged the same clerk's name twice," she said. Creed's smile thinned. "Your husband learned what happens to clerks who mistake hearing for ownership." The room went silent. Gideon stepped forward. Mara caught his sleeve. "Proof first." Creed's men moved at dusk. One poured kerosene through the telegraph office window. Another rode toward the temporary bridge, where a southbound coach was already crossing above spring floodwater. Fire climbed the office wall. Gideon ran for the bridge. Mara ran into the smoke. The coach's rear wheels broke through as a support pin gave way. Passengers screamed. Gideon reached the north anchorage, wrapped the main cable around his wounded forearm, and braced both boots against the stone. "Unload them!" he shouted. Jamie, Ruth, Orson, and half the town came without being ordered. They formed a line, passing children and bags from the tilted coach, while Gideon held the cable high enough to keep the wreck from rolling into the gorge. At the burning office, Mara found the key warped and the main wire severed. Creed appeared in the doorway. "You cannot send what no longer belongs to you." Mara kicked the spare relay beneath the counter, ran copper wire through the rear window, and clamped it to Hattie's iron fence. The wet earth completed a poor circuit south. Creed grabbed her wrist. The brass room key cut into her palm. Mara drove the telegraph lever into his injured thumb. He released her. Hattie struck him behind the knees with the same iron skillet she had carried on the first school day. "Transmit," Hattie said. "I will manage civilization." Mara tapped through smoke. Carson Fork Stop Creed confessed knowledge of Thomas Ellison. Death before witnesses. Stop forged seizure papers. Present. Stop send marshal. The reply came faint but readable. Message received. Stop marshal. En route. Outside, the final passenger reached safety. The bridge dropped another foot. Gideon's knees buckled. Orson wrapped the backup rope around the public weighing frame Gideon had built. Jamie locked the bowline. "Now," Gideon roared. They cut the coach team loose. The empty coach fell into the flood, but the people, and Gideon, remained on the bank. Creed's hired men saw the town standing together and lowered their weapons. The deputy removed his badge when Orson showed him the forged signature. The marshal arrived the next morning. After Creed was taken south in irons, Gideon found Mara beside the burned office, soot streaked across her face and the carpet bag still packed. "I believed the bag instead of you," he said. "Yes. I made another woman's cruelty answer in your voice. Yes. I am sorry." Mara gave him the ledger. "Carry this." He took it carefully. She took the carpet bag. "I am still not leaving." The bridge and wire were rebuilt before summer. Bitter Pine supplied labor without charging Gideon for either. Orson opened his freight books. Families recovered years of stolen deductions. On the day the first clean signal crossed the new line, Gideon asked Mara to walk with him to the bridge. "I do not want a wife who belongs to me," he said. "I want a life that belongs to us both. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Mara said, "with the pass house, line office, and road contracts in both names." "Agreed." "And I keep my lock. Always." They married at the North Star beneath coils of new telegraph wire. Mara wore the brass key at her throat. Gideon did not kneel so others could accept his size. He stood fully upright while she reached for his hand. Years later, after Ruth Pike died in an influenza winter, Jamie and his little sister came to live at the Pass House. By then, its door had opened to stranded travelers, battered women, orphaned children, and anyone the mountain had left without shelter. Mara's room still had its lock. Most nights the door stood open. Beside it hung the first brass key. Beneath a wooden sign Gideon had carved in letters Jamie helped him spell. "No one beneath this roof belongs to anyone but themselves." Gideon no longer bowed beneath his own rafters. Mara no longer checked the latch 3 times. And when storms crossed Bitter Pine, the telegraph wire sang above the rebuilt bridge, carrying the same lesson from one side of the mountain to the other. Strength was not the power to take. It was the power to hold and still let go.